Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's NCVER webinar, Making Delivery Better, Perspectives from RTOs. I'm Tabatha Griffin, one of the senior members of the Research and Data Analytics team here at NCVER, and I'm joined here in the office today by Hugh Guthrie and online by Melinda Waters. Hugh and Melinda authored the report that they will share findings on today, and welcome to you both. We are also joined by two discussants, Jenny Dodd, Chief Executive Officer of TAFE Directors Australia, and Andrew Shea, Chief Executive Officer at Builders Academy Australia. Thank you both for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your comments later. The structure of today's webinar will be as follows. We'll first hear the presentation by Hugh and Melinda, and then I'll invite Jenny to share her thoughts, followed by Andrew, and we'll then have a short Q&A session afterwards. Before we get started, I'll very quickly run through some housekeeping. To the right of your screen, you'll see the control panel where you can select your audio mode and ask questions. We invite you to submit your questions in writing using the question panel at any time throughout the webinar, and for privacy reasons, only we can see those questions. We'll acknowledge all questions either during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar or afterwards via email. I'll now hand over to Hugh and Melinda to begin their presentation.
Thank you, Tab, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you also to NCVER for hosting the webinar and providing an opportunity for us to share our findings from this project. We also look forward to Jenny and Andrew's input as well. It was quite a large project, a very interesting project, and we'll do our best to convey the messages as succinctly as we can in a short time frame. What we aim to do in this project was to find out what RTOs think about the quality of delivery, how they define it, how they measure it, what it looks like in practice, how they know they're doing a good job, what's standing in the way, what are the barriers to quality from their perspective, and what they think can be done to help them do a better job. We also set out to find out if we could define quality, and we'll let you know a bit later on how we went with that task. The work in this project builds on a previous publication that we did where we looked at the literature review. The literature says a lot about this and goes back quite a long way, and it's still a lot of it very, very relevant today. So for this project, we talked to over 100 people across the country, most of whom were working in RTOs, and the RTOs represented from adult community education, from TAFE, from the private sector, and from the enterprise RTOs. The RTOs were recommended to us for high quality delivery, and we talked to a range of people in them, teachers, CEOs, quality and teacher managers, either individually or in groups. We also talked to policy experts and quality experts, including some in higher education, people in funding and regulatory authorities, and representatives from all the RTO peak bodies and from two industry associations. We didn't talk to employers or students for this project. To help us frame the interviews and make sense of the data, we had a lot of data. We drew on Harvey's 5 dimensions of quality in higher education. This really helped us understand the perspectives we were hearing through the interviews, and these are the understanding quality as excellence, understanding it as consistency, understanding it as fitness for purpose, value for money, or transformational experiences for students. All of these perspectives came out in the data and all are valid, but interestingly, the exceptional excellence view and the transformational view kept coming back. We also drew on Euler's 3 purposes of VET, the individual, the social and the economic perspectives, and this really helped us understand that how you view quality depends very much on what you think VET's purpose is, and that might be at an individual level, preparing students for work or for life, helping students into education and work from a social equity perspective or an economic perspective, which you might hear more from industry and employers about, skilled workers meeting the needs of industry.
It's my job now to talk a little bit about, I guess, what we call the compelling messages, because there's a lot in this report. Not surprisingly, we found it really difficult to define quality in a way which suits all the stakeholders. It's almost impossible to do that. So really how RTOs think about and define delivery quality depends on what their purpose is as an organisation, their purpose and goals, the sort of students that they have enrolled, the sorts of courses that they run and the qualifications they offer, and the context in which they operate. Another thing is that RTO size can actually be quite important, because that determines what's important to them, but RTO size and their breadth of profile can make the job of defining delivery quality a little bit more difficult, because what quality is to one part of the organisation won't quite be the same as it is for another part. So in fact, these larger RTOs are multicultural organisations, whereas perhaps for some private providers, particularly smaller ones, they're very, very clear about what their profile is and what they're trying to do. Likewise for enterprise-based providers, they're very, very clear about that, because they are working to train the people for the business. Their mission is quite clear. Community edge providers are a little bit more different in the sense that in part they have that very, very strong social aspect, but they also have that training to provide for industry needs. So they're trying to balance those sorts of things. The final couple of points there is that a person's role in an RTO can have a strong bearing on how they perceive quality in the terms that Melinda just spoke about. If you're a leader or a manager, you're very much focused on the goals, making sure that the organisation passes its audits, but providing the right sort of culture for the organisation. If you're a teacher in the organisation, you're very much concerned about doing the best thing for the industries that you're working in, but really in particular terms, what you're doing for your students. Your students are the most important things to you. So the final point, and we'll return to this a little bit later, is that RTOs presently are finding it quite hard to sustain high quality delivery for a range of reasons. So what does good quality delivery look like? All of these aspects of it, and you can read them there, are consistent across all of the RTO types, but they vary in emphasis and importance depending on the course or the provider type. And for some groups, and particularly in community education providers, employment outcomes aren't that important. It actually may be more important that you develop the person, prepare them for life, help them overcome perhaps a learning difficulty or other sort of aspects. So that is top of mind rather than perhaps getting another job. So there it is, preparing them for work or some other destination, and preparing them for life, which really gets back to the whole Kanganesque side of things, the notion of preparing people for learning and lifelong learning. Developing an occupational identity, particularly where that applies to the organisations you're working with, closely tied to industry in the workplace, in many, many cases, meeting the needs and expectations of employers in many, many cases, so that results in employment and other outcomes, for example, working more closely with employers to get work placements and those sorts of things. But again, it's that personal growth and well-being that comes through time and time again when you're talking about what good quality delivery is. So that's not only the teaching and learning, the assessment and what have you, it's all the wraparound services, the technologies and what have you, which enable students and others to get the best possible experience they can from the delivery that they undertake. The final point is, of course, that really high quality delivery is continually adapting to the changes that are occurring. So how do they evaluate delivery quality? And here we pass back to Melinda.
So we then asked RTOs to tell us how they know they're doing a good job. And in the descriptions, we heard a whole range of qualitative and quantitative measures being used, focused on, you know, input, process, output, outcome, and impact, as the slide shows. What we found really interesting, though, that the RTOs wanted to talk to us more about the quality of teaching processes and learning processes, learning environments, student experiences, and how to improve them, rather than on quantitative measures and input and output measures in particular. They collect this information internally and externally, and via a range of mechanisms, which I won't go into because, you know, you'll be familiar with a lot of these. And we expand on them in the paper quite in detail. But I'll just use the time to make a few comments that we found really interesting. Internally, we found that the larger RTOs have really sophisticated information systems they use to obtain information and monitor quality. The smaller RTOs, however, and particularly the really small ones, they still do that, but they rely on a lot less formal ways of getting their information, what we call anecdotal or informal. And that was ways of checking the pulse, keeping an eye on and feeling the vibe of delivery, what was going on in the learning environments. So we explored that a bit further, the value of this information. And what we found was it was really important because it was really immediate. It was really relevant to certain groups and to certain courses to sort of feeling the vibe or gauging the quality of them. And it also is a red flag to emerging problems. It also tells a much richer story about the quality of delivery than more conventional methods. We don't know, however, how much this information is reported and are captured and reported. It'd be interesting to know that. It also tells a much richer story about what it takes to deliver well in the current environment. Externally, we were interested to see how much benchmarking is going on across RTOs, peer review in some cases, and the RTOs are using this to verify, or the external information to verify their quality decisions, but also to sort of share really good practices and problems and quality processes and teaching practices. The upshot of all of this is they're trying to describe to us that they're painting a comprehensive picture of what quality looks like at different points in time over a student life cycle and trends in time. And what we concluded from this is how they do this and how they're using this information is a real hallmark of quality, and particularly in the RTOs that we spoke to. Thanks, Hugh. So what they want to know about, it's all about the students. And depending on type of RTO, particularly what their focus is there, they're also interested in the outcomes and impact of learning. Are they delivering the course they said they will? Are they delivering the outcomes they said they promised? And did a course meet the purpose to which a student or an employer chose it? So they're also interested, of course, in employer satisfaction, teacher satisfaction and capability, their compliance with external standards and targets and internal targets, and community and industry engagement. Type of RTO dictates the importance of all of those. Thanks, Hugh. As one RTO said to us, they think of it as a big pie. So it's about painting this sort of comprehensive picture of what quality feels and looks like.
So it gets back to, sorry, Melinda.
Yep.
So it gets back to what maybe isn't measured well. And I think Melinda's given us strong hints towards that in terms of those less formal qualitative measures, which are often as important, if not more important, than the formalised measures. So the whole thing is you're not getting the total picture because there's stuff you just aren't measuring. One of the things that came through to us from this first dot point was actually from a private provider, but I think you would find it true of community ed and indeed any form of provider, and that's not leaving people behind. We will do what it takes to get the job done, to deliver as well as we possibly can. So the other thing is the longitudinal impact of delivery. In other words, it's not just, there's an immediacy in the data that we often collect. It's maybe three months out, but it's that longitudinal impact that might, bells and whistles might happen a year or two down the track, but we just aren't capturing that. The other thing we might not be capturing as well as we could is the amount of networking and collaboration RTOs do and that their staff do. Because I think if anything COVID has taught us is the importance of networking and collaboration. We've just got a whole mess better at that, I think. Another thing is, and this is what so many of the people we spoke to talked about, and Melinda hinted about it too, is that transformational nature. You are there to change people's lives. I think it was Tim Costello at a conference I went to years ago described vet teaching as and vet teachers as being purveyors of hope, people who can really change things. So there's a lot of things to do with the subjective quality of things, but one thing that did emerge well is the real cost of doing good and high quality delivery. It's not just about the contact hours, it's about everything which goes into delivering as well and to as high a quality as is possible. And the difficulty can be that you deliver down to a price, not up to a quality. So what are the barriers to quality? This was almost, these were very, very consistent across all the provider types we talked to, from the publics to the enterprise-based providers, and it's the funding, needless to say, the formulae that dictate it, and we acknowledge that that's very, very difficult to set. It's very, very difficult to set the levels. Contract durations mean that you don't know if you're in receipt of government funds, whether you're going to have that funding next year or down the track. So it's very, very hard to make long-term plans and to make decisions about whether you develop resources or delivery approaches that are really, really good. Inconsistency between jurisdictions, because each of the government funding will be done by a different group. So we talked to one provider which said they had 5 quality staff but 10 people managing contracts, because there was just this incredible difference between the information that they wanted, when they wanted it, how they wanted it. Compliance-based regulation was another important point here, because it really doesn't support RTO's efforts to try to improve their quality. It in effect almost constrains it, because as you'll see very, very shortly in one quote, it doesn't necessarily encourage the innovation or collaboration or capability building exercises. You just don't want to experiment too much. The quality of training packages emerged time and time again, and how difficult they are to interpret and turn into training programs, but also because of the extent to which they are updated continually. There's considerable effort and cost to make sure you are remaining compliant in a regulatory sense. There's been other work that NCVER has done, and I think was the subject of a webinar a little while ago, probably last year, around the difficulty of recruiting, retaining, and developing teachers. It's hard to find them. It can be difficult to retain them, and as I think burnout can become a real issue. One provider talked about the extent to which they came in enthusiastic, really wanting to pass on their trade or occupational area, really thrilled, but sooner or later, just the regulation, the documentation, the administrivia ran them down, and as the person we interviewed said, they then lose the will to live. So thus, as we've said, we feel that there are limitations to the current quality metrics. While they're fine as far as they go, it may be that we really need to be having more of those. We really need to be thinking more about the sorts of qualitative ones. So here's a quote which was quite distressing, actually. Let's not let the teachers do anything without making sure the quality and compliance people are happy with, because while we want to maintain compliance, but it does chip away at the creativity, the passion, and stops people doing anything new or potentially better. So back to Melinda.
So we asked then the RTOs to tell us what they would like to see that could help them keep improving what they're doing and particularly move to quality assurance. So the suggestions were sort of pretty familiar to us, really. So a national vet body, and that would promote and support quality delivery, but also innovation and collaboration across the sector. Needless to say, funding models that support and incentivise good quality delivery. There's a strong push for more trust in what proven RTOs do, trust that they'll do a good job while supporting others. Trust sort of turned out to be an issue associated with too much regulation, I think, and it also went to how much trust is placed in the professional judgments of teachers and how much we invest in teachers' ongoing development. A strong message was better use of VET's significant body of research, and as I said earlier, you know, the research on quality is really extensive and really good. And finally, getting rid of the term compliance was a consistent message. So what we did in all the data is we kept an ear out for all the practices that we were hearing RTOs were undertaking, and there were some pretty noticeable practices that are coming out. And we think in anticipation of quality assurance in the future, and that was building a culture. A lot of the leaders, particularly we spoke to, are focused on building a culture. The information systems were referred to, benchmarking, peer review, collaboration, trying to improve their information systems, using more anecdotal data to inform their quality. And what we did was we picked out all of those practices that we thought could be used across the sector. We also highlighted what RTOs were saying were enablers of quality. And we took a model proposed by Blom and Meyer, which in 2003, which sort of named 4 subsystems of the quality system. We mapped all these practices under them. So as you can see, there's quality policies, frameworks and strategies, quality leadership and administration. We took that we sort of amended this diagram for RTO level, quality programs and resources, and quality teaching and learning experiences. The full diagram's far too complex to put up, and it's in page 35 of the report, I think. And in actual fact, we really battled to put everything into it because there were so many things. What the strong messages from this for us were, firstly, that a whole system approach is really critical, that all these subsystems work together to support RTOs. it shows how complex the environment is for them, how many balls they're juggling to deliver quality. And it also shows that the important enablers sit at different levels in the system. And this is where Hugh came in as well. That it means that they're not always, RTOs and teachers in particular, are not in control of many of these enablers and actually have to work with them. Once again, going back to the fact that the whole system has to work together and support quality practice. Although we note that a lot of the talk is around the quality of RTOs and the quality of teachers and the quality of teaching, but perhaps we should be looking at a more broader perspective, I think. Thanks, Hugh.
Okay, so this is the last slide. One point I did want to make, I guess, about the barriers slide that we had before, that there are the challenges and barriers. We know at the moment that there's a lot of work that the Department of Education, Skills and Employment is doing, and we are seeing communication from them from time to time about that. One thing I think Melinda and I are looking forward to see is the final wrap up of the vet workforce quality strategy. I think the other thing which is pleasing at the moment is the transition by ASQA to a self-assurance model of regulation. So, and reviews of pricing and costing. So there's the hope that of all of those balls in the air that Melinda was just talking about, there's a hope that a few of them will land in the right sorts of places as we go down. So as we tried finally to move to the idea of what a definition of quality looks like, we came up with these 4 points. And the 4 points, you're sick of hearing this by now, I'm sure, that it's transformational, and that they can achieve and develop professionally and personally. So if you can get it right for them, it's probably going to be pretty good for industry and for employers. The second thing is that it's student-centered. This is really the way providers think about things. Thirdly, that it's fit for purpose and that it does meet the needs of stakeholders and their purposes. So that's really where the another important element is that dialogue which occurs between providers and the groups that they work with and serve. And finally, that it's evolutionary, that we are looking at the way things are changing and adapting to all of that. So thank you very much. That's our presentation so far. So back to Tab, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Hugh and Melinda. That was a really comprehensive summary of your project, which was, as you know, a very complex project that covered a lot of ground. And I'll remind everybody that it is available from the NCVER portal if you want to get more detail on it. But now we'll turn to Jenny to get her views on the findings. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Tab, and thank you, Hugh and Melinda. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading your research and your report, and it built for me on previous work both of you have done in this space. So it didn't sit in that one moment in time, because you both have been working in various iterations on this question of quality and the way in which learners engage in that space through the interpretations you've done. So I really did enjoy it, and thank you for your presentation. My reflections from a TAFE perspective are that so much of what you say really rings true. And I think Harvey's work around those 5 dimensions, which Hugh, you've highlighted a number of them, are really important in this environment. And in particular, you've brought out the dimension of consistency. And I think that comes through when you start talking about the challenges around networking and collaborating. They're very important components that I think that we've moved to in a much more structured way in the last period of time. The other one that I think is also really important is around fitness for purpose. And fitness for purpose often sits within that overarching understanding of quality within an environment of the culture of an organisation. And in TAFEs in particular, which are broad spectrum deliverers across such large scopes, from certificate ones right through to advanced diplomas, from trade students to foundation students to creative industry students to nursing students, and so we go on. That fitness for purpose is a very big ask, and one of the things I've always felt as a member of a TAFE workforce is we bring together a conglomerate of industries into one organisation, and we want all our people to hold those industry currency and competency. Indeed, we're required for them to hold it, but we also need them to step right into being first and foremostly an educator, or first and foremostly focused on their students. And it's around getting that culture of the organisation and alignment with the whole quality message that our educators and our teachers have, and indeed our student support staff have, that is in alignment, so that you have that overarching organisational driven outcome, which I think in some ways fits into the fitness for purpose. Then, of course, Hugh, you also talk about the transformation, and that is fundamental to your final definition of quality. It is about transformation, it's about student-centeredness, and it's also, you mentioned fit for purpose, about other stakeholders and how they view it, and I think that that's critical, and it's about evolutionary. It's not a static process. In your paper, you so rightly start to identify some of the areas of self-assurance that we know that ASQA is starting to review, and having reviewed some of those thinkings that sit behind the ASQA model, first off, that's where the alignment with organisation is critical. The leadership and governance of the organisation must be there to be able to provide the framework and structures through which our teaching workforce are able to make the judgments about what is quality, because it has that overall governance structure that is assessing quality. Within that sits, of course, components such as the quantitative assessment of student and industry needs, which we're required to do as quality indicators, as we all know, but actually doing that genuinely at a team-based level against organisational leadership and governance is really important. So being able to really listen to what students are saying through the feedback they're giving us. And at a TAFE level, we can often report to ASQA a student satisfaction level, which actually can have quite divergent scores from different teams. And it's being able to really tease with each team what that means against overall organisational objectives. And then, of course, I think there has been, and this is part as well of the ASQA self-assurance process, there has been over the last few years significant investment in professional development. It's probably always, it has always been there in the 20 odd years I've been in the TAFE sector, but I think we've really made sure that we are growing that professional development, and some of that you so rightly and Melinda talked about in terms of consistency and the networking and the collaboration that's occurring both within large RTOs now, because one of the challenges within a large RTO with multi-delivery points for the same qualification, and you mentioned this, and I think one of the quotes you have actually is about the potential for inconsistency, even within one RTO for the delivery of the same outcome. And so that's very important that we have those networking arrangements. And more importantly now, even in TAFEs, we've grown those collaboration networks very broadly across our national network. And then I think the other component is the importance, and there's a lot more opportunities for this, for the sharing of networks. And one of your recommendations there, Melinda, that you talked about was a national vet body, and maybe that is the culmination of sharing of networks that might come through such a national professional body. We've been calling for that for some time, but to make that work, it needs real dollars, and it needs real dollars sitting behind it. So I think that all of those components come together. So some of your recommendations are around, we need to, what your findings were, we need to trust RTOs, and that should come through in the self-insurance piece that ASQA is driving. At the TAFE level, we really speak highly of the process for that, as long as the process for that is truly about trust. And so those RTOs that earn that trust are truly enabled to move away from compliance, as so many of your findings suggested, into a much more high trust environment. And I think also that comment Melinda made in the findings about professional judgment of teachers, our training package environment has by default, because of its highly prescriptive nature, removed some of that. And I advocate very strongly for an outcomes for industry-based learning environment that will allow professional judgment of teachers and will enable and encourage creativity, which I think will, if the self-assurance models are there, if the networks are there, if all of the other components are there, will create and foster high levels of quality. So thanks for your research. Thanks for your presentation. I think it ticks so many boxes of what we've been talking about more broadly in the sector, and it's a really important piece of input into the development of where we need to go in the next period of time.
Thanks so much for that, Jenny. Hugh or Melinda, did you want to respond to that before we throw to Andrew?
Not really. Checks in the mail, I guess. It's thank you.
Okay, Andrew. Well, sorry, Melinda.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to make a comment, Jenny, that I think that whole transformational element of teaching and learning is one of the next challenges. How do you measure that? And it takes a leap to sort of know how to do that, I think, and that will be a challenge. So the transformational learning and the capabilities and qualities that the really good teachers show in order to facilitate that. How do you quantify that? You can't quantify that, but it's passion and it's creativity and it's, you know, commitment to do what's best for students. And I don't know if the system really looks after that now. That was
very important comment, Melinda, but I would set it within the context of organisational priority, governance and leadership, because it's always around, and you had a quote there on page 16, which was from a TAFE teacher: what makes a good teacher? Building constructive and inspiring learning experiences, having industry at the core, teachers current in industries, teachers current in contemporary learning design. And I would add to that, teachers who are working to achieve the organisational outcomes in that process, because that alignment is so important in that transformational piece.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And Andrew, we would love to hear your perspective on the report.
Thank you very much. And Hugh and Melinda, it's a fantastic paper that does consolidate the thoughts of many in industry and is good food for thought on best practice, not only from a provider perspective, but also for those more broadly in regulation and policy makers, which hopefully this can play a role in helping to guide. I will comment on the fact that I'm on day 3 of COVID, so hopefully my voice sticks with me. But I'm sure it will. I'm all pepped up on cold and flu tablets, so I'm ready to go. So we've got 2 hours to go for this webinar. Is that right? I'll just get so I will comment that I think it's a unique time to have done this study because of the nature of COVID and the nimbleness needed from a range of providers to pivot to an online learning environment where that may not have been their core strength at the time. It's a bit of you can't be what you can't see. Some providers didn't know what a good online provision looked like. They didn't understand the difference between synchronous and asynchronous learners. They couldn't lean on a training package to say, how can I quickly give professional development and where are the experts in this space? Because potentially the experts in online learning and particularly that synchronous, live, interactive, real-time remote are few and far between, although there are leaders that have both emerged and matured through the stage of COVID. So I think where we find ourselves now is really saying, what does quality look like now that there's been a greater community of practice focus on sharing ideas, on sharing best practice, on benchmarking, and some of the levers to help providers align in their own minds what does quality look like and what are we trying to achieve have been through peak bodies and collaboration. I'll say that I'm a non-executive director with ITECA, so the independent peak body, and ITECA and TAFEs Australia would agree on 99.5% of items because we're focusing on the quality of outcomes for learners to help those graduates and ensuring that we can sense check that there's good policy to help providers do that, and that's a significant challenge. ASQA as the regulator, the relationship with the regulated community has significantly changed over the last 3 years particularly, where, and I'm a member of the ASQA stakeholder liaison group, So when you look at the items in the paper about understanding, one, not just working from a compliance lens and trying to come from a self-preservation perspective, but generally come from a quality perspective, the regulator changed its remit to have an educative capacity. Now, those webinars and those sessions and bringing in guest speakers has been extremely valuable because, and I presented in a couple myself, and I presented with presenters from TAFE Queensland initially, and enterprise RTOs and community. And what we were able to speak to is, this is how we're trying to solve the problem that others have. And I think from a quality perspective, to actually identify quality is very difficult to do unless you can do that benchmarking. So I think that the point that talked about a sort of a group vet sector membership type forum, I'm not sure whether that's necessarily needed, but what is needed is a greater collaboration between the peak bodies and the communities of practice that are there, and also a role being played by regulators and others to build that capacity. That also has a role to play in the training package themselves. So I actually, it came directly from an industry reference committee meeting. So I'm chair of the Education Industry Reference Committee. I've got 6 hours today, so I've stepped into this one for a little while, then I'll go back to that. And only a couple of weeks ago, we signed off 2 new units of competency in online learning and online assessment. Now, astonishingly, at an AQF level 4, there was no developed units of competency specialising that capability. And the friction in us trying to get that approved during COVID, and when we initially asked 18 months ago, was a very convoluted process that we are hoping will only be, we're hoping will be signed off next week in an AISC meeting. But to be 2 years later, and it's not to have a training product, shows that there's a friction in that process of training package development. And students don't understand the convoluted nature of our industry. And quite often they will judge in their success factors and their satisfaction, they'll judge the training provider on things that may well be outside of their control. And I'll give you one quick example. The Diploma of Building Construction Building was released November last year. Now, the previous qualification would typically be delivered by RTOs over around an 18-month period. An updated qualification got released that went from 18 units of competency to 27 units of competency. And the typical teach out for this is 12 months, which can be extended under the regulator. The RTOs delivering this have to go back to students and say, we understand you've already undertaken 16 of your 18 months, but if you don't finish this date, you need to do an extra 12 months. Now, it's very hard to explain to a student, oh, sorry, it's the training package development process. RTOs were rarely consulted. We've got no option but to actually transfer you, because obviously from a customer perspective, you can't go up to someone in a restaurant and say, by the way, I'll put this wine and dessert on your order, whether you like it or not, and you've got to pay me for it. There's a commitment to what you're going to deliver. So I think that the viewpoint of students on the experience they get within a training organisation sometimes can be guided by the pastoral care and the support for the foundation skills and the extra learning needs, the ancillary support for the student to be on a successful journey. But it can also be impacted by items that were touched on by Hugh earlier, such as funding that is so varied across different states. It can be impacted by training package changes, which are outside the control of the training organisation itself. One IFC member was mentioning earlier in our meeting that they have over 110 qualifications were all superseded within a 4-month period. So they need to transfer every single student to a new qualification, get them to repeat work, do extra work. Is the actual the reward that student gets in the slight changes of the unit of competency worth the frustration and worth the logistical challenges for the training provider to be focused on compliance rather than quality? I'll question that. Definitely, there's definitely a question over the value of that actually occurring, and I think that convoluted nature impacts every day in training organisations. The other side is from a longer-term investment into training. So many states give 1-year funding contracts to non-public providers. So Hugh touched on earlier, and Melinda had in the paper as well, that the inability for an independent provider, particularly to have confidence in investing in resources and infrastructure and have a long-term view towards that quality, is very much restricted, where they are not sure whether they're going to have a funding contract to support students in 6 weeks' time at the end of the year. So that really does have a significant impact on the ability to invest in a longer term focus, and that would make a significant difference to have that confidence of that investment that all good quality providers do, because the lens is not the student just in front of them. It's give the best experience to meet the aspirations of that student, but also build a framework that embeds that culture of quality, of collaboration, of investment. And without that investment, there's some corners are cut somewhere outside of the desire of the RTO, and the students ultimately affected in that quality. And I think some of those items were mentioned in the paper. My last point would just simply be, when measuring satisfaction, when measuring success, it is important to have some pragmatism around the questions being asked and how those outcomes are being determined. Particularly, an example would be completion rates. So if I think from some of our members in ITECA and my own organisation, civil construction is a good example, with so much road maintenance underway and big build initiatives in places like Victoria. If someone was to complete the main heavy machinery units for civil construction, for example, they could step out and get a well-paid job that would build towards a career. Now, that means they won't have actually finished the qualification. So by one measure, that may be a failure that they didn't complete. However, that individual has met their aspirations. They've taken on a career pathway. They're extremely satisfied. And it's really about the timing of that question on, did they meet the goals of their training? Well, it depends what those goals were. And I think that nuance is particularly important. And to try and ask broad-based questions, as identified through the paper, that's difficult to do, can sometimes tell a story that's not accurate to the satisfaction of what actually is occurring through the sector, and the satisfaction of employers and students. Keeping in mind that a lot of parties will highlight the negatives in our sector, but still satisfaction rates from industry and employers are in the high 80% through most years over the last decade. So I think there are some tweaks. I think there are some improvements always to be made, but with a pragmatic eye on not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and that's always the risk with policy, to try and reinvent something new rather than actually continually improving the sector as RTOs need to when they're delivering quality delivery and assessment. I'll hand back over to Hugh and Melinda.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And some of those real life examples that you shared really complement the findings in this research, I think. Hugh or Melinda, did you want to respond to anything that Andrew has said?
I could hear a lot of the truth there in the real lived experiences, Andrew. I think, you know, certainly what you were talking about is what we heard from a number of stakeholders.
I was going to mention, Hugh, what was really illuminating to me was talking to some of the ACE providers. So, and how employment outcomes in particular are just not relevant to many of those students, when the providers are working really, really hard just to get some of those students into class. So if they're actually there and they're attending and they're happy and they're learning, that is the major measure of quality, and employment doesn't come anywhere near it at that point in time. Yep.
Okay, thanks. And we've got a few questions that have come through the chat function, so please continue to send them through. I'll ask one now. I don't know whether you've actually considered this or not, but this listener is interested in whether you considered the National Strategy for International Students from a vet perspective in this work at all. And really, did you talk to RTOs about their international experience at all?
I think the short answer would be no. Are aware that of a range of the issues that sit with international students, and particularly, I guess, you know, it's the matter of whether they're onshore or offshore. One of the issues with international students, of course, is getting an Australian qualification which might not have, you know, a particular currency or a strength, you know, back in their home country. But again, on work I've done on in the international student area, one of the real issues again is that total learning experience, making people feel welcome, building their English language skills. There's so many other things that happen in the English language space, but in all honesty, no, we didn't speak specifically to that group.
Okay, so another question that we've had come through relates to the point that you made that the definition of quality really depends on who you speak to in an RTO. And they're wondering whether there were any examples where these views were contradictory or whether it just tended to be more that the emphasis was different.
Melinda, would you like to comment on that? I think it's more a matter of emphasis of where you sit in the organisation rather than with their contrary. There shouldn't be too much difference if the culture and leadership of the organisation is right. That's a point that Jenny touched on. But it's really what's important to you in terms of where you sit in the organisation and what your job is.
There was, I'll just make one comment there, Hugh. There was one quote from a teaching department manager who said by necessity they had to focus on consistency as a perspective of quality. And so it was all about all those things that a manager needs to do. We then spoke to a teacher and it was all about the vibe, and it was all about the quality of the learning experience, and it was all about doing their utmost to help those students achieve what they wanted to achieve. So there was a distinct difference. It was coming at high quality from two different perspectives. They weren't in tension as such. They just were necessary approaches, I think.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. Another question that's come through is why doesn't the existing professional bodies adopt the quality framework and develop the framework further to suit the needs of the RTOs who choose to use them? Do you have any comments on that?
I think I'd prefer to throw that to Andrew and to Jenny. I
can jump in, Hugh, on that if you like. Just from, I think the starting point to that is whatever the framework of professional development or investment in staff capability, there needs to be an investment from the employers in there to build that capacity. If I have a look, in 2020, there was 39,000 individuals who studied a certificate for training and assessment against only 1,015 who studied the diploma. There's an underutilisation of the qualifications available, and a viewpoint that a certificate for in our sector is only an entry-level position and then build capability from there. Now, there's professional development networks, there's professional development providers, and the peak bodies do a fantastic job of this as well. But it really has to be led by the employer to live an internal learning environment that invests in their personnel to build that capability. So whether that be a capacity building framework built within the organisation, whether that be accredited or non-accredited or micro credentials, I think it's that culture of investment to build the capability that pays dividends in the quality of experience. And I think we're ISO accredited, for example. ISO accreditation is about good quality processes that are not just compliance focused, they're about what works for your business. I think the self-assurance model under ASQA will start to move towards that more so, about how do you deem quality in your own organisation. I think that's a positive move. And I think as long as the organisations keep investing in the capability of their staff and invest in their processes and systems to follow that best practice towards quality.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Jenny, did you have anything to add to that point at all? Or are you quite happy with what Andrew said?
I think Andrew has answered it well, and I think there is an ongoing investment both at organisational level and also at network level. And Hugh and Melinda identify the importance of network, and certainly from a TAFE Directors Board perspective, that was one of the priorities they placed back on us at the Secretariat, was we need to enable more of those professional developments at network level. So I think there's quite good alignment there in many ways.
Great, thank you. And we've had a couple of comments come through just pointing out that the National Quality Improvement Framework is currently under development as part of the skills reform work. Now we've got one final question here, and I think that you'll appreciate this one because of some of the discussions that we've had through this project. This person says that much of this I've heard before, but your research is confirmation, and that was certainly something that we discussed. Now that we've got the research, where to from here? It's the big question, isn't it?
It's always been interesting. Somebody who spent nearly 40 years in the vet sector, I think, you know, one thing I've learned is nostalgia ain't what it used to be. I don't think Melinda has a similar, not a similar period, but probably at least 20 to 30 years in vet as well. So I think it gets to the point when you reach my venerable age that nothing surprises you anymore, that you have heard it all before. I think what surprises me is that we've known what the issues are, we've looked at the solutions, but somehow we don't seem to be able to turn the issues and what might be solutions into action. And I think that's because there's so many players in the pool that's really, and I'm going to mix my metaphors here, to get all the ducks in a line. It's you're playing off states and territories and the Commonwealth, you're playing off different types of provider organisations, you're playing off employer groups and unions. It's just so hard to do. So I wrote a piece for for the Vet Development Centre where I think I talked about inertia, the great enemy of the vet sector. And I think that was just my little flight of fancy before Christmas and probably after one too many gin and tonics. But it's the, it seems to me that is one of the issues. It's like Jim Hacker said one time that policy and enacting policy is like you've got a road train which is got the engine of a lawnmower and the brakes of a Rolls Royce. It's hard to get going and it's very easy to stop.
So as you suggested, you know, there are a lot of players in this sector, and so it is difficult to affect change. But if you were a single RTO and you read this report, how can they use this information, do you think, to improve their own quality? If they're just looking in their own space and what they can control, as you've said, there's factors out there that they can't control. What do you think they can take from this?
I'd be interested to hear what Andrew and Jenny would be thinking here, because Andrew are one and Jenny was one in a previous role in a couple of, I think in 3 different TAFE systems, either as senior or running it. So I'd be interested to hear what they've got to say.
I think there's 2 quick points I'd make. Is one, training organisations should not think they're an island, just simply trying to deliver to an individual customer. To be actively becoming part of a community of practice, whether that be their peak body or whether that be other networking groups, is integral. To not only benchmark, as been spoke about in the paper in today's session, but to also challenge themselves to learn lessons on systems in place in helping with student progression, in understanding different learner cohorts and some of the key andragogy required for learners across delivery they may not have been otherwise delivering in. I think that COVID has actually brought forward the capability of the workforce quicker than anything else could have, particularly in the ability to support a diverse range of students over a range of delivery mediums. So the opportunity now is to build on that and find what is the happy medium to meet the customer's needs and meet the student need moving forward. And the other side is for RTOs to put their hand up, to be on working groups and to be part of the decision making, because at the moment there's a push for big business groups to say, we are industry, we should make all the decisions for training. And I think that is particularly flawed. I think it's disrespectful to the industry, and I think it's inherently going to cause a greater disconnect without respecting the providers and the peak bodies to be part of the conversation, to be pragmatic about saying how in the supply chain do we get the result that all want, as opposed to a couple of key voices who have been around for a long time simply trying to dictate how the training should occur. I I don't think that's helpful, and I think that the importance of peak bodies, communities of practice are more important than ever.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And Jenny, did you have any comment on that?
Just a quick one. I think the important thing is about continual reflection, and the fact that we've highlighted the transformational and student-centred nature of what we do at Providerland is a very important message, because often the rest of the sector, which I think Andrew highlighted there, looks at it from so many other perspectives. But as a provider, our engagement is with the student. And I think that report does it well, and therefore it's a very good reflective piece for continual improvement, and it is about continual improvement.
Thanks, Jenny. I think that's a really great place to leave this, and we've run out of time anyway. So I would really like to thank Hugh and Melinda and Jenny and Andrew for sharing all your thoughts today. And many thanks to all the participants who joined us to listen. I hope you found it informative and interesting, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.